everybody. Thank you for being here, and I'm thrilled to see so many little kids in the audience. This really makes me happy. I'm Becky Dayton. I own the Vermont Bookshop in downtown Middlebury, and we are celebrating our 75th anniversary in 2024. And I have, in the last year plus, really enjoyed doing events here at the library, mostly with Renee, who's the adult librarian, but this evening with Trisha.
You give me a 10!
It's bright and colorful, and I love all the tonight, I am thrilled to welcome Ashley Wolff to the library to talk about her newest book, My Towering Tree. Ashley is the author of dozens of books for children, some of which we have here, more of which we have at the bookshop, and there are loads that I'm afraid that I've never even seen because there are so many of them. Ashley grew up here in Middlebury, went to Middlebury Union High School, and graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design, where she became an honest-to-goodness artist, and where she was inspired to write her first book, which she published in 1984. Am I right?
That's correct.
And that book was represented by Dyke and Reba Blair at the Vermont Bookshop, long, long time ago, well before my time. And Ashley returned to Addison County about 15 years ago?
About exactly 10 years ago.
10 years ago. And is now a full-time resident, and we're thrilled to have her. And so without too much more ado, Ashley is going to read the book to us and talk a little bit about it, and then she and I will have a conversation, and there will be lots of opportunity for questions.
Yeah.
So thank you.
That sounds perfect, Becky. Thank you so much. So, Becky alluded to this, but I grew up in Middlebury, and we moved here when I was 9 months old. And this is my home library. This room did not exist back then. The children's room was upstairs. And I remember coming here with my mom and getting my library card here, and it feels so familiar to me. And I love that. I mean, that's the very good part about moving back to your hometown. So thank you all for coming tonight. It's so great to see so many people from my past and present, and I'm just thrilled. I thought maybe the easiest way to present My Towering Tree rather than holding up a book was to make it into a slideshow. So I did, and I'm just going to read it from the screen. And
oh, you put it on a computer?
so the one thing I neglected to put on the show was the cover, which is sort of silly, but you can see the cover right over there. And it has features of Robin, because I felt that when, as an illustrator, it's our job to create a universe for a book to exist in. And this book had very few clues as to where its universe was and who was the center of the universe. So you will see a lot of choices in this book that I had to make and narrow down, and I may allude to them as we go along, and hopefully they'll be obvious. The robins anchor the beginning and the end. So, in my yard's a towering tree. It reaches high to cover me. I lie beneath the towering tree and think my thoughts and breathe and be. In my yard, squeaky squirrel, he zigzags like a tilt-a-whirl and races up the towering tree that reaches high to cover me. In my yard's a garden bed. It overflows with green and red and feeds the squirrel, and sometimes me, who races up the towering tree that reaches high to cover me. In my yard's a buzzy bee. It pollinates so happily the veggies in my garden bed, which overflow in green and red and feed the squirrel. And also me, who races up the towering tree that reaches high to cover me. In my yard's a square stone, reminding me I'm not alone. My dog's there, buried with his bone. I sometimes leave tomatoes red, his favorite from the garden bed, attended by the buzzing bee and the squirrel up in the tree that reaches high to cover me. But what is this? So soft, so warm, that nudges without shape or form? It's not the dog gone with his bone. It's not the bee with buzzy drone, nor fuzzy leaf with greenish curl, and surely not that crazy squirrel. It wheedles through the towering tree, whose branches leave a window free, and to let the sunshine tickle me. I feel those rays beam from above. They wrap me up in arms of love, big enough to cover me, the squirrel, the garden, and the bee, the dog, and all that we see, that I can see, even my great towering tree. So you can see some shades of the house that Jack built. If you're, a student of children's literature, with the cumulative building of the elements, and then you can see she breaks the rhythm, and I think ends the book very nicely with a different twist. And at first I thought this book was so quiet. I could barely stand it, nothing happened. So my job is to make something happen in a book. And that's the illustrator's joy and torture. So if you're expecting me to be to mince words about what kind of job this is, that's not the not the right person for that. It can be challenging at times, but as much as I complained about this while I was working on it, I'm quite happy with the finished result. So I hope you are too.
Yes, thank you.
So we can leave this picture up on the screen, and Becky and I can talk about it. And if you have any questions about anything, please ask. I'm very open about my process and everything else.
Sit right there, and I'm going to sit here, and I'm thinking of my role tonight as sort of the chief moderator. I'm going to ask you some questions because I always have lots of them.
Okay.
And I really hope that people will just raise a hand, interject, and ask follow-up questions. And you alluded to it quickly just then when you referred to she being the author of this book.
Yes.
With this book, you are
I'm the illustrator.
Yeah. And there was an author.
There is an author.
And I am curious to hear a little bit more about the process of matching authors and illustrators.
Okay.
How projects come to you and how you choose them.
Well, so I have lately been doing all my books with a little imprint of Simon & Schuster called Beach Lane Books, which I started working with because they were in California back when I lived in California. And now, of course, I'm not in California anymore, so I have to deal with the time change in the other direction. So they're very small, and they have a small list, but I like all the artists and authors they have on their list. And this woman, Jana Matthews, is one of their newest authors, and she is a music teacher in Indiana. And I think that her musical voice is apparent in the book. I don't sing myself, so I couldn't possibly sing it, but I think she has made it into a song.
Did you discuss it with her when you were given the opportunity, or did they simply hand you a manuscript and say?
Well, my editor knows me pretty well, and she knows that I like to draw things that are natural, and she thought that we would be a good match, but we do not discuss, I do not discuss it directly with the author. I did make one little change though, and this sometimes happens. I never would do this directly, but the title used to be The Towering Tree, and all through the book it says My Towering Tree. And I said, we should change the title to My Towering Tree.
And I,
So-
that works really well, because I think children do think of
Yeah.
their immediate environs as
Theirs, yeah, yeah.
So how did this project and other projects where you're the illustrator but not the author contrast with those in which you are the author and the illustrator? And I think we have an example. Wildfire, you are the author and the illustrator.
Yes, and all the other books you've got on this
Okay,
table,
all of
except for
these.
this one.
Yeah.
Well, I've been both. I've been just the illustrator in many instances in my career. I'm in one of those, dozens of books. So sometimes it's easier just to be the illustrator and you don't have to do as much thinking. Sometimes it's harder because the words are there and you can't change them, except maybe a little bit around the edges. And so when I'm the author and the illustrator, I'm tweaking the text all the way up to the point where I finish the book. I might take out some words, and when I teach writing, children's book writing, I always say, you don't need that, you don't need that, you don't need that word, because that's what the picture is showing. So the words should take up the labor of doing what the pictures can't do, and they should. And I think this one does quite well.
Yeah.
It names things, but it doesn't have a lot of adjectives, and it's a first-person narrator, so that right away is, almost like a play. And I'm a big fan of dialogue in picture books, and rather than description.
Yeah. But not with quotation marks. Dialogue in children's books often comes.
No, not with quotation marks. No. I mean, the only
I sit very
time.
squarely in adult literature,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, no quotation marks. So, did that answer the question?
Yeah.
So-
I'm curious though, when you are doing a book that's your text and your pictures, is it a simultaneous creation? Are you writing the text and creating the pictures and creating the pictures and matching text to it? Or
I'm writing the text first, and then I'm editing the text as I illustrate.
Okay.
And sometimes I might even add something to the text. But usually it's the other way around. Usually I'm taking away.
When you submit something for approval or acceptance to your editor or publisher or what have you, is it just the text usually?
Yeah, usually.
So they accept or deny based on the text?
The very first book I submitted to this particular publisher, I did have what I would call a little rough dummy, which is a little sketch version of it. And that was called Baby Bear Sees Blue, which I think was published in 2012 or somewhere. And they didn't know me so well, but now they know me, so they don't need that. They know that I'm gonna.
This was your first Beachland book?
Yes, this is my first beach book.
I love bears.
And I didn't know, I knew vaguely one of the editors there, and I thought I might end up working with her, but I ended up working with her much younger colleague, who's, probably wasn't even born when I started. No, I'm sure she wasn't. If she's 40, I'd be surprised.
Wow.
And that's when I started making books, in 1984. So, you never know.
Is it Year of Birds, your first book?
Yeah.
Is it in print?
No,
I didn't think so.
no.
But one of your very early books was re-released in the last few years.
Only the cat saw, but it's a different version.
Okay.
It's slightly updated. But yeah, I've got a lot of books, but a lot of books are out of print.
Okay.
And that's, and any librarians in the audience will know that it's a super competitive field, and many, many, many books are released every year, and how can they all possibly stay in print? You have to have some little extra thing to.
Well, there's so many children's books these days that are very topical.
Yeah, and this one, I noticed a couple of years ago that there's this sort of new genre of mindfulness books and mental health awareness books, and I didn't write this, obviously, but I think this fits into that genre.
Yes, nicely, without hitting you over the head with it.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. Marie?
Well, I have a question about what made you think of this wonderful idea to use the notebook and, really also add some wonderful humor to the magic of the book.
Well, I don't know, it just came to me. As you know, it's not in the text. Neither is the wheelbarrow nest, which I had as a kid. My sister and I we had this old wheelbarrow. We used it for many different things. A Barbie swimming pool and a nest. And I honestly wish I could say, oh, I was looking through some old notebooks and this came to me. It just came to me. I like trompe-l'oeil. That means to fool the eye in French. And I think those pages have sort of a trompe-l'oeil look where, it's like you're looking over her shoulder and you're actually seeing her hands and the markers. The drawings, I will say, I was lucky enough, I visit schools, and while I was working on the book, I was at a school and I just put some paper down in front of some kids and I said, please draw me a bee. Please draw me a squirrel. I got a lot of really good ones. And I didn't say crazy. It just turned out that way. Yeah. And the dog too. The dog too. I don't think I told them to draw me a leaf, a curly leaf. It's kind of, that's one of those lines where I'm like, if I were the author, I'd probably change that. I'm not, so I'm going to deal with it. Yeah.
Well, I have so much curiosity about the process of writing children's books and how they're, when your editor says to you, did you make a multi-book deal? No.
No, not usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they approach you one book at a time for an illustration?
No,
work,
usually I approach them nowadays.
Okay.
Because I had 2 agents in my career, but I disliked them both, so I no longer have an agent.
Well, you have the power of an established.
And so now I come up with an idea. 2 times Beach Lane has come to me, and the other one was called In the Canyon. Mm-hmm. And that is a Beach Lane author, Liz Garten-Scanlon. And I thought, oh, this will be fun. And then this is the other time that they've offered me a manuscript, and the rest of the time I've come to them and said, here. I have a really quick story about wildfire. So I used to live in California, and my older son was a wildland firefighter. And he, in 2012 and 13, and in 2012, he joined the National Fire Service in May of 2012, and in June of 2012, 19 young men were killed in Arizona. So you can imagine, as a mom, how that made me feel. Heart in my throat all the time. And so the first thing I did was, rather than stay up at night, was I learned everything I could about what wildland firefighters actually did in their jobs. And I joined some Facebook groups, and I just was voracious in my search for reassurance, basically.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask you about research.
Yeah.
So many authors do so much, for adult books, do a lot of research to
Yes.
create their stuff. And you talked about In the Canyon. I wondered whether you got to go visit the Grand Canyon and
Oh,
all
yeah.
the research.
In fact, I walked down to the bottom and back in one day.
Well, good for you. You could die.
I know. I
The
know.
signs say.
There were signs all along the way saying, don't do it, don't do it. I was with my sister, who was only, a little crazier than me. But we did it. We left at 6 in the morning and we got back at 8 at night.
Wow.
It was 16 miles round trip. But that doesn't take in the elevation game.
Well, then you go down and then you have to climb out
Yeah.
when you're tired.
Yeah, and hot and
Yeah.
dehydrated.
So I interrupted you a little bit to ask the question
Oh.
about research, but
Well, I was
did
going
this
to
come
tell
out
you
of your
a weird
research?
publishing thing that happened with that. So I write it in 2013, the second year that he's a firefighter. And I submit it to my editor, who I already know. She rejects it. And I tried to sell it all over the place to anybody that, you know, was doing, this is kind of a creative nonfiction book. And then I got discouraged and I put it in a drawer, and then in 2018 I was at my teaching job in Hollands, and I pulled it out because there was an editor there who was willing to look at whatever you had and give you some advice. And I showed it to her and she said, yeah, you should just make the animals a little bit more important and maybe shorten it up a little bit over here. And I did that, and in other words, minimal changes. And I submitted it again, and I sold it because in 5 years, climate change had made wildfires so much worse that all of a sudden it was a super topical.
Yeah, and did you have the illustrations at that point? Or
No,
was it just the text?
Just the
Yeah.
text.
Yeah, so you don't take the time to do the illustrations? when you
No,
have a contract?
no, not really. No.
What takes more time, the illustrations?
Oh my God, yes. Yes. I mean, I always say you can write a picture book in the shower if you.
Yeah. What is the typical word count of one of your books? Some books are much longer, but.
I don't know. You know, when I'm writing fiction books, I usually say 300 to 700 is a good sweet spot.
Yeah,
So I don't know. I'd have to go back and check.
it's interesting.
Just enough.
Yeah.
Just barely enough.
Yeah, as a parent, I was always very mindful of how many words there were in
Yeah.
my children's picture books, because it can be tedious for the child to sit and listen to too much.
Well, I mean, go back to a book like Make Way for Ducklings.
Yeah,
It takes
perfect.
forever to read. It's really long.
Is it?
And-
That's funny. It was
and-
awesome.
and-
Yeah.
And,
Maybe I skipped a page.
no, it's got a lot of text.
Oh.
And all of McCloskey's books have a lot of text. But that sets them in an era when that was common.
Yeah, well, kids have
And
longer
nowadays,
attention
that is not common.
Yeah.
Things have changed. In the 40 years that I've been doing this, I've seen a lot of changes.
You
And,
don't look a day over 40, so.
yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, there's a question
Oh, I
on
was just going to ask, when illustrating, what's your favorite medium?
Oh, well, I don't have one, because I've done illustrations in watercolor, pen and ink, gouache, collage, linoleum block print. I really work around. I don't like just one particular medium, and I get really bored easily if I'm forced to work in the same medium, you know, over and over. So, I mean, you can look there. My towering tree is basically done in gouache used as watercolor, and gouache just means opaque watercolor. But the Bear books are done with linoleum block prints that I then hand color with watercolor. And Wildfire is done with acrylic gouache in a much more opaque, painterly approach. Rougher, anyway.
Well, all your books have the most amazing color saturation, the illustrations there.
Well, you know, a lot of people will say, find the palette in your book. So, you know, just what are the colors? My books are all the same. They're all primary colors. I really love the primary palette. I go all, you know, it's my go-to red, yellow, and blue, and variations on that. Yeah, hi.
Ashley, my first place to live when I moved here in 1983 was the studio apartment next door to your parents' home.
Oh, yeah.
And so the first thing that I learned about you was that you like to paint barns. And I wonder if you'd like to I'm curious about how old you were when you did that, but also then your first book and the subsequent ones, because I was teaching third grade in Bridgeport.
Oh,
I loved your books, absolutely loved your books.
thank you so much.
And
I did have quite a career as a mural painter around this Addison County because I was dating a guy who owned a farm out in Shoreham. And one summer I was in art school and I came home from art school and I didn't really have a job. So he hired me to paint the barn doors. Yeah, the Doolittle Farm, which is no longer painted. They're gone. But in between painting barns, I would drive the tractor and I hayed and all the things that you do on a farm as well. So I think I was making maybe $5 an hour. But he bought the paint, and so I painted 6 or 7 doors on that farm, and they were trompe-l'oeil, most of them. And then I started getting some more jobs around the county, and I painted, I don't know, maybe a half a dozen barns. A sugar house up in Lincoln, and I did one out at Cobble Hill Farm, and I did one on Smith Street in Shoreham, right along the lake.
Are there any that are still there? The Doolittle Farm barns were the first thing that I made an actual mental note of when we moved to Vermont. I remember driving on Route 74, seeing those barns and just being so intrigued by this joyful thing on the side of the barn.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there are any more left in the county. Partly was my own mistake. I used a kind of oil-based mural paint, which was really good paint, but I didn't prep my surface hard enough, well enough on that first job. After that, I learned that I needed to prep the surface. So I was a little naive, but I had a really good time doing it. And then when I moved to California, I painted a bunch out there as well, big ones.
So what other kinds of artistic projects have you done aside from painting barn sides and children's?
I do a lot of commissions. Right now I'm deep into my pet portraits for the Middlebury Studio School. They have an annual auction where you can buy a pet portrait, and I've donated 5 pet portraits, and I'm still working on them.
Are they realistic, or are they like your Rufus illustrations?
They're not cartoony, but they're not super realistic either. So I just did 2 cats named Bernice and Ollie. They're both black. So I had to figure out how do I do 2 black cats. They look good. I did the background in yellow, so they really pop. Yeah.
I was wondering, how big are your creations when you're doing a book? Because I know they're not necessarily like the size of the page of that.
They are. They are. So a book, there's a couple of considerations when you're doing a book. You can work larger and have them shrink it down, which is great for pieces with a ton of detail in them. But I think that's a lot of extra work. So I tend to work exactly to the trim size. So my towering tree is a 10-inch square, and my pieces are 10 by 20.
Who decides the size of the publisher?
That's called the trim size, and the publishers have some standard trim sizes. They don't like you to do anything too kooky because it's more expensive. And so, but I like a square book. I've been working in a square now for more than 10 years. I don't know, it just seems to suit me. It's nice because it makes a nice long landscape, but it isn't so short that you can't go tall. But in my towering tree, can you reach one of those? I got to do something that I've never done before, which was to paint a vertical. So at the very end, you can see most of the tree, including the owl.
That's so cute. I love all the little details that you can discover.
Well, so consistency, that's very important in children's books that most people take for granted. is that you make sure that everything remains consistent throughout the book. So if she changes clothes, she has to be in the same outfit. If the tomatoes are in a certain place, they have to stay there. If the the wheelbarrow looks a certain way, and this was a really easy book to do that by that standard, but some books are way more complicated of having to count how many elements there are on this page and then duplicate it on that page. And
Like with the firefighters' uniforms.
oh, that was easy too. I'm thinking of the Miss Bindergarten books. Those had a lot of detail, and I had to be super careful. And one time I made a mistake that got as far as going to the publisher, to the printer in China,
Oh, wow.
and they had to call it back. Because not only did I not catch it, but none of the fact checkers and, continuity people caught it, and it was in math. And that's why I think it slipped right by me.
Marina?
Are you ever tempted to use computer help with
So,
those issues?
well, not those issues, but digital illustration is definitely what most people are doing nowadays. I might be a little too old to, although I know that Paul Zielinski, who has done many, many children's books, is using the computer now because his eyesight isn't so great. And he finds it easier to do work digitally because, of course, you can blow it up to whatever you need to be in and go in. I don't use it except for, a little bit around the edges because I really think I'm faster just doing paint, brush to paper. And a lot of people do it because it's fast. But then there's the dreaded AI. And, this is becoming more of an issue with illustration because, what is going to happen if somebody just decides to illustrate a book and says, okay, give me a big tree and, a squirrel. And so artists are very anxious about AI.
Rightly so.
Yeah.
I want to do a little self-promotion and your promotion at the same time. So I'm a volunteer at Dead Creek Visitor Center,
Oh, yeah.
and your art is on the new signs on our new interpretive trail.
I know, I want to go see
And I was
it.
going to ask you if you've seen them.
I've only been back a week.
Okay, and I wanted to share with you that they're just so fun, and they have just brought that trail blooming in a way that it had all kinds of potential. But having those there is so great, and I just love knowing that it's your work, but I don't know how they connected to you. How did you get on that project?
It's kind of convoluted. It's been a couple years. In fact, it might be more like 5 years because they contacted me before COVID. And I thought that it was dead. And then after COVID, it came back to life. And gosh, what is the connection? It'll come to me.
I was just curious if it was something you had somehow connected yourself to, or they found you.
It's an actual state project. I'd never worked for the state before.
It's a lovely, just for those who don't know, the interpretive trail, the center's on Route 17, and the interpretive trail is all native species and bringing in, encouraging natural habitats for all different kinds of creatures. And the storyboards that go around the trail now have a little otter who narrates the whole natural history of the area. And there's a lot of teachable moments. It's all hands-on for kids. And anyway, if you haven't been out to the visitors center, we're open on weekends right now, and it'll be Wednesday through Sunday starting in September.
Oh, okay. Okay, just weekends?
Weekends right now.
Okay, I'll try to make it. It's supposed to rain all weekend, but, yeah.
I see your Lakes Alive poster that you did a few years ago for the Lake Illinois Film Lake Association. Every morning when I go out to the lake,
That was some years ago, yeah.
very
I do, you asked me about other artistic things, and I talked about the Middlebury Studio School. I do a lot of volunteer stuff. When you live in a town like Middlebury, and you are known as an artist, people will come and say, could you do this for us? So I've done a lot of the stuff for the Town Hall Theater up there. membership brochures, and I've done a lot of stuff for, I did get paid for the Dead Creek though. That was great.
And I think that was part of the delay.
How to come up with the money to pay it?
Right, well, the state is famous for robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I think that's what happened. I think the money was in place, and then it was shuttled to someplace else, and then we brought it back.
Right.
All the water and brought it back where it was. So that's what I think. I mean, COVID played a part too, but I think part of it was hunger.
Well, good. I'm glad that, you know, it was nice to be paid, because being a self-employed artist, which I have been, you know, since 1984, is not always the easiest thing. You are, you know, talking about robbing Peter to pay Paul, you know, you have to balance your budget pretty carefully, because I get royalties from my books twice a year. And so I never know what my royalty check's going to be, and so I have to cobble together a lot of different jobs to make a living.
So tell us a little bit about your teaching, because I'm sure that's part of that.
That is one of my
artists
jobs.
teach in order to
Yeah.
sort of support themselves so that they can do
So there's
their creation.
There's a wonderful graduate program in children's literature at Hollins University in Virginia, where I started teaching in 2008, and we're the only program that teaches writing and illustrating together, because it's our theory that you can always teach an illustrator to write. You might not be able to teach a writer to illustrate. The skill set is different, and not every writer sees pictures in their head. But a lot of illustrators can be taught to write a good script. And so that's a really fun gig, and it's 6 weeks, and I go every summer, and it's like summer children's camp, or children's book summer camp for me.
Is that what you just came back from?
Yeah. Yeah, and
It must be a great way to make connections with other artists,
Yes.
creative types. Make friends.
It's jammed with creative types.
Yeah.
Yeah. And lectures 3 times a week, and, you know, it's never a dull moment.
So, and you mentioned that you'd been there at one point when there was an editor visiting. So do the publisher extend scouts out to look for talent?
Our last visitor is always an art director. This year we had Martha Rago from
Penguin Random House.
Yeah, Penguin Random House.
Yeah. The biggest publisher.
One of the art directors at Penguin Random House. But we always have an art director, and we always have an editor, and we always have a visiting writer and a visiting artist. And they do workshops, and we have others more scholarly. There's a program, there's an MA and scholarly study of children's books.
Is it an MFA program?
It's MA and MFA.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really fun place to be. Any other questions?
Kids are starting.
Sharon, yeah.
When there's a print run, what is considered a general number of books that are printed?
Well, they try to figure out the print run, guesstimating how many they will sell in the first year. And so it can be anywhere from 10,000 to 500, depending on your track record. And so when you hear about a first printing, that's their guesstimate of what is a good first printing. Some books will sell out their first printing in a month, and then they'll go out of stock, which is really, frustrating, and they'll have to reprint. That's only happened to me once when it was a Christmas book and it ran out right before Christmas. Oh, yeah, very frustrating. Yeah, but that book was published in '88 and it's still in print. So, yeah. Andy?
So I have a question too. Do you read other children's books?
Do I?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yes, voraciously.
Okay.
And I'm not always pleased with what I see. I think there's a lot of books published and not all of them are worthy. I like a book that is not just like a one note band, and I like a book that goes beyond its front cover in terms of good illustrations. Because, you know, it's not an easy thing to do, and I think a lot of people think, A, that they can write them, and B, that they can illustrate them. And I will say that many people come up to me with an idea for a children's book, and it's always about some amazing thing an animal did. And those are, they make occasionally good books, but that isn't really what I think makes a good book. I think a good book is one that resonates as a universal experience, even if it's told through the eyes of a bear cub. It's more about real everyday life than it is about that one extraordinary thing.
You said that you hadn't met the author, that all the communication went through the editor.
Yeah, we are
They would talk
communicating
to her,
now.
and
Yeah,
is that normal? Is that pretty usual?
and it's really for the best because, like, if the author has something to say that I might not want to hear, and vice versa, it should go through the editor. So,
But if she sees something in your illustrations that she has an issue with, or then she just, it's all.
she's allowed to tell that to the editor, and the editor tells it to me.
My daughter-in-law actually did meet the illustrator. I mean, she had this really unusual experience, which I'll tell you about.
Okay.
But, yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, sometimes I have known the author before I did the book, and then in that case we might communicate because we know each other. But if I don't know them, usually I don't meet them until after.
One more question.
Is there an author who you really like to work with? And then another question, is
Okay.
there an illustrator, like other illustrators who you admire?
Well, I mean, there's lots of authors. I mean, I have so many illustrators that I admire, and the common thing among my favorites is that they really know how to draw. And that so I worked this summer with Matt Faulkner, who's an author and an illustrator, and his drawing is just, you probably know, you know him, he's most famous lately for graphic novels, but he did Groundhog's Dilemma and The Taste of Colored Water, and you know, he's a really good artist. So who would I like to work with as an author? I don't really think about that much. But now that you've mentioned it, also, because I don't have an agent, I don't really have that opportunity. You can't just go out and sort of tap an author on the shoulder and say, would you write a book for me? But I might, now that you've mentioned it. I know a few. Yeah.
We want to give Ashley plenty of time to sign people's books.
And you can still ask me questions.
Yeah, but so are there any other questions that people would like to ask? In the-
Ken?
Is there a target age for this book? Because the repetition of the animal names would tend to suggest a younger audience, yet you talked about mindfulness, which is a much higher concept.
You know, that's a great question because picture books are generally for children under 5 because as soon as they start to learn to read, they tend to turn away from picture books because they're considered, you know, they look at them as more books for babies. And then they move to easy readers. This book, I do think, is more like, you know, maybe 4 to 7. I think a younger child could enjoy it, but they don't really get it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they'll see a certain level of the fun of the squirrel and stuff, but they won't get the mindfulness part. And same with Wildfire. I don't think that is for really young children either. They'll appreciate it on some level, but I think it takes an older child to get that. Susie.
I happen to know that you have a very handsome dog. And you love to draw him and use him in your illustrations.
Yeah.
the books that you've done that for? Are they, are you more emotionally close to those, or are they favorites of yours?
Well, he's only been in the one book so far, where he's actually standing in for Wayne Kingsley, who was a beloved farmer in Forestdale, to all of us who live on Lake Dunmore. And that took me a long time after writing that book to finally decide that it was going to be a dog who was a farmer. But my other dogs, I've had 4 border collies, and my other dogs have been kindergarten teachers. And sometimes they're even just plain old dogs. So they're, when you become fond of drawing a certain thing, and I like border collies because they're so graphically, interesting to look at.
The contrasting fur.
Yeah, that nice black and white graphic, that nice face with the big blaze on the front. They're just fun to draw. Yeah. Give them a red collar, boom, you're done. Well,
All right, well, it was lovely chatting with you. Thank you.
Becky, thank you so much for inviting me to your Vermont author
Series. And
Yeah.
next month, it's not going to be a children's book author.
Who's it going to be?
We're talking to Jonathan Mingle, who is a journalist who's writing about the Atlantic gas pipeline.
Oh.
So it's not as far from this as you can get. So there's a lot of variety. in
Noah
this.
and David, don't come.
Don't go to
around.
But everybody, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to my